Alberto Campagnolo is an assistant professor in book archaeology and digital humanities at the Book Heritage Lab based in the Maurits Sabbe Library at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the KULeuven. He is an experienced researcher with a diverse background spanning book and manuscript studies, digital humanities, and book conservation. Alberto earned his PhD at the Legatus Research Centre, University of the Arts in London. His research focused on the automated visualization of historical bookbinding structures, with a particular emphasis on the manuscript collection of St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai. He previously held a postdoctoral research fellowship in codicology of Carolingian bindings at the Université Catholique de Louvain, and he is currently also a senior researcher in the ERC-funded Prima project focusing on codicology of modern manuscripts based at the Université de Tours in France. In his presentation, Hybridity and Transition, Exploring Carolingian Romanesque Bookbinding Practices, he will investigate the hybridity and transitional techniques evident in Carolingian Romanesque bookbindings, with a particular focus on manuscripts from the medieval collections of Cambrai Cathedral. Alberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share the screen. Okay, so thank you for inviting me. It's very interesting to be here, and it's also very nice to be talking after Melissa and the people that I know very well. So people who know me know that I wear a lot of hats, and I trained as a book conservator and then turned into digital humanities. And in this presentation, I will talk about the project that I worked on as I was working on the postdoc in Louvain-la-Neuve. Should probably turn the screen there. And I will tell a story of how I approached this project and which tools I used, and then we'll talk about this hybridity that they came about looking at these books. So the KULeuven project was a FNRS project, funded project based in Louvain-la-Neuve, in the French part of Belgium, but the books were kept in Cambrai, which is in France, and I'll show in a second where it is on the map so that people can see if you're not familiar with the region. The corpus was focused on the Carolingian manuscripts and Romanesque manuscripts, and my particular part of the project was focusing on the bindings. And there are definitely two definite groups that we can see in the books on the Carolingian manuscripts. So these were book blocks that were written between the late 8th century up to the 10th century. They all come with a very distinct set of bindings that look very similar. And then on later manuscripts, you have a much greater variety of different kind of bindings, which reflects also the way in which the collection came to Cambrai. So just a couple of words on the Romanesque bindings, because I will not cover much more about that in this presentation. The whole collection is in the Cathedral of Cambrai, Cathedral collection. And the cathedral had a very large library in the Middle Ages, and it incorporated a lot of collection that came from nearby monasteries and religious communities. And you can definitely see in the Romanesque period that these books kind of show tell where they came from with the different bindings. So you can see bindings that came to be in the cathedral, if they look similar, of course, they come from this collection that were gathered in the cathedral later on. For what concerns the earlier books, so the Carolingian books, um, they all look the same, as I said, and they appear to have been put together and bound within the set of the Cambrai milieu. In the slide here, you see that I call them Carolingian type bindings because they do look Carolingian, but there are a few things that did not show up, add up, and we'll look into more details of this as we go through the presentation. Now, just to put Cambrai on the map, is in France. It's where the yellow dot is here on the map. But although it's been always a center that was related to the more towards the French part of the area, it's very much on the border. So it's not so far from the Belgian border, and it's always been an area where things kind of mixed up, and you can see a lot of influences from different things. Now, as I said, in this talk, we will concentrate on the what we will call for now the Carolingian type bindings. And so when I first came to work on this project, it was the first time that I had to work with materials that was so early. And also so I, for the most part, worked in the UK or in Italy. And there is not a lot of early bindings left in the UK. So you have the Anglo-Saxon bindings that are, there are only a few samples left. And in Italy, there are only 5 bindings that can be ascribed to the Carolingian period. So I had never really worked with a lot of these materials, but there is actually quite a surprising number of early bindings in France, especially in this part of France, and also across the border in Belgium. So when we set up the project, the idea was to see, where were these books found. In what circumstances are these the original bindings that came with the books or not? They're not. And can we trace their history? So this is how we came to it. And so what I did in the beginning, of course, I looked into the books, and I spent a couple of weeks with the books, looking at the details, trying to record and try to understand how they were made. But I had no reference with other books that had similar structures. So, you can see things once you really understand them. If you don't, if you don't know things into details, that is kind of difficult to understand and see exactly all the details that you need to understand them and to make up their whole history. So what we did is we started looking at collections that went kind of around the area to see other books, other collections that had similar material, so that I could train my eye and see more details and understand better these objects that I had in front of me. As we were doing this research, I was collaborating with Elodie Levesque, who will be presenting next month in the next set of talks. And as we did our research, we also did skin analysis on the covers using proteomics and the e-zoom process that Melissa has described early on, so I won't go into details of this, and Elodie will talk much more about it. I will give a couple of notes about what we discovered in relation to the books that are described in here, but Elodie will speak more about this in the next presentation. So I set up a set of tools and kind of methodology to try and go about and record and understand and notice all that I needed about these books as we go through. And because we had a lot to cover, I had to come up with something that I could record very quickly and in a setting of a reading room, and then so that I could export the data and then work on it and also work on the measurements and understanding of the structures as I was off the books. Oftentimes we could only go to the collection once, and so it was not really easy to go back to it. And as I said, there is a lot of these books in France. So like when we went to Valenciennes, we spent a day there and we had to look at uh, something like 35 books. So it's a lot to record if you are just looking at, if you want to look into the details. Um, as was mentioned in the presentation in the introduction, I did my PhD at the Legato Research Center in London, looking at automated visualization of the bookbinding structure. So, of course, as soon as I started working on this, I kind of dug up the work that I had prepared for the PhD and adapted the XML description database to cover the details that I wanted to record and that if they were likely to be found in these early structures. Because the database that had been used for St. Catharines was specialized on a specific set of books, I had to adapt it so that I was able to cover in more details the structure that I was likely to find looking at these early Carolingian structures. And once I was recording my data, I also wanted to write a little script that will allow me to look and compare these data sets in an easy manner so that I could look at especially the boards and the attachment methods in a way that I could compare one book to the other very quickly. So in the same way as I did for the PhD, I took the XML data and wrote a set of XSLT scripts, so just scripts that take the data and transform that into diagrams. So through this, I was able to produce these kind of diagrams that had a set of information that I wanted to compare and check for the different books. So this one is one of the books from Valenciennes. There's another one here who actually had previous Carolingian bindings, then was rebound in a Romanesque style with a different attachment method. And these are set up in a way that the board measurements are almost comparable one to the other, and so you can see the spread of the sewing supports on the spine and compare very quickly from one to the other. Then the other thing that I did very quickly was to find a way to record a lot of information through images. So as I was going through the books, I wanted to have a way to record information and measurements very quickly and very easily. So I went on and I found this app that works very nicely on Android phones. It's ImageMeter, and it's an app that's used to take measurements of rooms, but it works very well on objects as well. And what I do is that I add this little scale on my images so that I always know a point of reference that I can use very quickly, and then I can quickly snap the images that I need of the object, and then off the book I can take measurements and I can highlight structures and things that I want to make sure that I can record. The nice thing is that Image Meter also comes with a partner app on a Windows machine. So I can do this on the computer screen, so it's much easier to do the measurements. And the measurements are correct enough, as like there is plus or minus a millimeter, half a millimeter, which is good enough for the kind of rough measurement that I wanted to take. The second tool that was very useful and I had a lot of fun using is this endoscope. It's an endoscope that's devised for actually engineers looking at engines. It has a double camera and it can be connected to a phone to use. Now, because of the spines that are unattached, so there's no glue on the spines, and they are kind of thick books, so there's a lot of gap when the book arches up and opens up. One could insert this endoscope inside the books without touching anything, without creating any damage. Of course, for the books that did not allow this, I would not insert the endoscope inside. But for those that I could, I did, and it was actually very good and useful because you could see a lot of information that otherwise would not be available. And this was especially useful for the books in Cambrai because they all actually came with a binding that was actually in very good condition for its age. So there was not a lot of detail that was available to the naked eye through the, especially on the spine. So the endoscope, as I said, has a double camera, so you can see straight ahead or on the side, and it can be inserted. And as you go through, you can see what you encounter. So here's the part of the end band, then you get to the first sewing thread, sewing station, and you can check for previous sewing holes or look at the boards and things like that. So it's actually quite useful. So these are some of the images that are taken. Now the quality is good enough. Not probably publication style, but it's good enough to see the details that I wanted to look at and really understand the structures from inside. So it's very good to look at the insertion of the sewing supports into the boards, for example. Sometimes to recognize the wood because it was not visible from the outside of the cover. It was also very useful to look and analyze how the endbands were sewn, especially the beginning ending of the sewing. So this is a tool that I really liked and enjoyed, and I find it actually very useful when it can be inserted. And for another set of books, I also looked at how to create something that I could really work off the reading room, but in such a way that I could really manipulate the object to really see details that I was not able to capture just through images in a way that actually made sense. So photogrammetry is actually quite nice as a technique now because now you can take images with your phone. I didn't use any special illumination. This was the illumination that I had in the reading room. Just took snaps of the object from different orientation and with free software. I mean, it's free if you upload up to 50 images per project, and 50 images are more than enough for a book object. And once you do that, the software guides you through building the 3D model. So you end up with a 3D model of the object that you can work with. And I can show you on this video here. It's particularly useful to understand, for example, like the end bands, how they were connected, how they worked in the attachment to the boards, and other details that you can really take pictures of details, but then in the details you lose track of what's happening around it. So because the technology now it's actually so easy and quick, this is something else that actually was very, very useful to use. Another thing that of course comes with the photogrammetry is that by default, photogrammetry is measurements. So you can again take precise enough measurements. Again, the error is about plus or minus half a millimeter for what I could gather. And so you can take measurements of anything that was recorded inside the FTD model, which was actually very useful. Because you are taking pictures of the object from outside, but it's actually standing on the book, you end up with an empty box like this. If you really wanted to have a 3D model, you could put the two halves together, but actually that was not what I was looking for. But actually, I found that having this empty box was actually more a feature than a problem, because it allows you to see things from the other side, and sometimes looking at things from a different angle actually made evident some aspects of the surface of the book that sometimes are concealed on one side, but by looking at it from the other side, it became very evident. So actually, it was a plus that I wasn't expecting, and it was actually very interesting and good to have. Of course, on top of this, one had to go back to the literature, and my go-to book was, of course, the Girmay, the Archaeological Medieval Bookbindings, plus a lot of other articles that had been written about earlier Carolingian bindings. Now, if one look at the literature, though, one find that there is a definite way in which Carolingian books and bookbinding structures are described, and then you go on to the Romanesque bindings. And there is quite a difference in some of the details between the two bindings. So the typical Carolingian binding would have this typical V-shaped lacings from the outside of the bolts. Then they're joined inside. They are usually on a herringbone sewing on two separate sets of coals for the sewing supports, and they are usually asymmetric, as in they were sewn on the board. So on the one hand, you have a loop that goes around the board, and then the whole book is sewn, and then on the other side, you have the two ends of the sewing supports that are single, that need to double up, so they're normally twisted inside the lacings inside the bolts. This is what you normally find, as a typical Carolingian binding. And there are examples of this. There's actually a lot of the example of this in, as I said, in France. So this is one of the examples from Valenciennes. As you can see, on the one hand, the sewing support is single, is looping around the bolts, and then end up eventually to the other side where they are twisted together, sometimes a bit more refined way, sometimes in this kind of rough manner. On top of the typical, separated V-shaped lacings, you also have others where on the inside it looks like a continuous set of lacings, like this one. And again, on the one hand, it's single, and on the other hand, it's double. You can see that there's the double twisting here, that it's creating a rougher look to the lacing. And this is just another example from this one is from Orléans, and it's not particularly clear how the actual sewing was done, also because there's a difference between the two bolts, so it's a liminal example. Then you get to the Romanesque period, and things are described having a very different set of lacing to the boards. You have this straight lacing that you're losing the V shape there. And also you start seeing the split alum-toed sewing supports. So it's one strip alum-toed, which is cut in the middle and then sewn. Usually still, at least in the early period, with the herringbone sewing, and then you go to straight sewing, also with packing. Another feature that you find in Romanesque binding is the back cornering at the head and tail of the spine to accommodate better the double herringbone endband. And this is one typical example of this. So you see the split straps and the back cornering and the accommodation of the on the end bands, and they go into the straight channels. What the story is normally told is that, so the main difference is that at one point in the 12th century, the sewing frame comes about and is invented, and then the whole thing start to change. So there is like this divide between before and after, and everything changes. Yes, this is true for most part, actually, but the books that I had in front of me, they were not following this pattern. There was something that was not fitting into either category. So when I started to go back to the books in Cambrai and start to looking at them with a different eye, and actually they appear more and more as hybrid. There was details that did not fit within the Carolingian era or Carolingian typical style of bindings, definitely were not fitting within the Romanesque period, but they were kind of sitting in between. And it was very interesting because, again, in literature, this was not recorded, but actually there is a lot of examples of this. So one typical thing that I found definitely in all of the bindings in Cambrai was that the asymmetric lacing was not in place anymore. So on both sides, the sewing supports were twisted around, so they were single and twisted on both sides. There was no looping on one side and then on the other. True, it could be that because the sewing failed and had to be redone, but this is actually quite consistent throughout. So you see that this is another example from Orléans, and on both sides you get the twisting of the sewing supports in the lace. As I said earlier, typical of the Romanesque bindings is the back cornering and the head and tail of the spine to accommodate better the end bands, which usually then in Romanesque period are decorated in a much more elaborate way with colors, and then also the tabs are sewn and decorated, which is not what you normally find in the earlier period, and definitely not in the books that I had in front of me. But back cornering was not recorded as a Carolingian feature, but I had it in my books, and actually there's a lot of other Carolingian style bindings that show it. So all of my books in Cambrai had the back cornering, but also there are other examples that I found, like this example in Orléans, where the back cornering is actually quite evident, both on the spine of the text block, but also on the boards. Also, I started noticing also a lot of mixture of styles, of features of styles. So on the one hand, you could get a binding like this one, where the main sewing is done on the symmetrical Carolingian style. So on both sides, the sewing supports are twisted together, but the end bands follow the traditional style whereby they're looped here and then they end up on the second side and they are twisted together. Of course, it's actually much easier to do it this way because at least when you do it, the sewing supports stay in place much better, much easier. There is actually quite a lot of examples whereby you could get the typical Carolingian V-shaped lacing on one side, and then the end bands are of the Romanesque style with the back cornering. And then you get to an example like this one from Valenciennes, where the boards look the same. They don't look like one was replaced and with another one. They look from the same kind of wood, the same kind of features on both of them. But on the one hand, you have the Carolingian V-shaped style on one hand without double twist. So these are actually looped around. And then on the other hand, you have the Romanesque lacing on this side. And you can kind of just see it here that this is a split alum-toed thong. So again, it's a mixture of things. And when you find something like this, okay, this is strange. But one example is okay, it's like, okay, this is interesting, but I don't know what's happening here. And then I found another example in Wolfenbüttel with exactly the same style. Now, this book was restored in the 1950s, I believe, but the conservation job was actually done in a very nice way that preserved a lot of the original features. And you can definitely see the V shapes on one side, the Romanesque style on the other side. The sewing supports here had been worked on, so I don't know whether the original this was single loop or not. And then, even more interesting, in one of the examples from Cambrai, the extant sewing was this V-shape Carolingian style lacing with a very rough twisting of the sewing supports on both sides, but I could feel under the skin 3 channels that resembled felt like a Romanesque straight lacing. And also what interesting is that these 3 sewing supports of the previous Romanesque lacing were aligned with the holes inside the text block of the previous sewing. So previous sewing was on 3 station and a second sewing is on 2 station, and these are the end bands. So I looked into more details on this, and this is where the endoscope was actually very useful because I could get inside and have a look at the board edge. And there, what you can see definitely the square channel that had been dug into the side of the board here for the Romanesque style lacing. So this book at some point had a Romanesque style lacing, and then it was redone in this style that looked like the previous Carolingian style, which was interesting because basically what it looks like in the end of the story is that these books, they all look very similar. They all look the same. They probably were rebound after the Great Fire in Cambrai, or the Cathedral in Cambrai in 1148. And this one at the bottom here doesn't have an original binding hole. There's some some traces left on the spine and of the tabs. And this one was probably burned. As you can see, it's not in a good state. Well, probably burned at that point in time. These other books, they were probably rebound. So after the fire in the 12th century, where the Romanesque period already had started. But because of their religious status and because of the way in which these books were conceived of, what it looks like is that they were rebound with a kind of a archaism in mind. And what's also interesting is that definitely although they look very similar, they were not done by the same hands. And I will tell you in a second why they were not done by the same hands. So there is this pattern of looking back and redoing something as it was done before, probably to give these older books, because again, the text block was from the 8th till the 10th century, to give these older books the kind of binding that was thought of that belonged to them. And the same kind of hybridism that I've shown you earlier, I found also in the other collection in Orléans and Valenciennes, mostly in Orléans actually. They were all rebound in the 12th century. So there is this 12th century style of hybrid bindings that were redone, at least in that area, in that part of the world of Europe, like so the northeast of France, where religious books were rebound and reusing these kind of techniques. Now, as I said, they all look very similar, but they're not done by the same hands, because looking at fine details, like the way in which the endbands were produced and started, I found at least 3 ways in which the endbands were sewn. And one of them is actually quite interesting, because I actually never encountered this before. It's very clear here on the picture. They start and end with a big knot, which is actually very apparent, and then they go all the way around, and then there's another knot at the end. So actually, there is a knot that starts here and then end up with a knot on the side here like that. And on both ends, head and tail, they have a similar pattern of sewing. This was not found in other of the books from Cambrai, but even the other one, they had a more traditional way of starting the endband. They all started with slightly different manners. So I would not think that these were done by the same hand, or even like people really in the same workshop. But they all look the same. Another very interesting detail is that when we looked at the skins that was used for the covering, all of these Carolingian style bindings had deer skin, which, as Elodie will say more, as I said, in next month, we found a lot in Carolingian bindings, so the whole period of original Carolingian down to this hybrid Carolingian, but then it disappears almost immediately in the Romanesque period. So these books, again, 12th century, the Romanesque period had already started, and quite well already. Again, because of this archaism that was used to rebound and to make them anew, they used the deer skin again, which again another feature that linked them back to the earlier and original style of Carolingian bindings. So by looking at this, I started calling them hybrid Carolingian type bindings. They don't sit in other way, but actually quite interesting, because they sit exactly in the middle, and they have a feature of this, a feature of that. Even the period, it's the liminal period between the two styles, but definitely afterwards in the Romanesque period, things change immediately. So it was it was something that was very interesting. And we enjoyed a lot looking into the details of this. Now, if you really, really want to know more, there is a chapter that kind of tells a story about this. It's in Italian, but at least it's in open access. And with this, I believe that I finished. Thank you.